All right. Well, today we're looking at the build-up behind World War II, looking at some of the major characters involved here. Right at the heart of it, we're looking at the study of human evil. I say evil's a word being thrown around very easily, but I say it's probably the best way to describe some of these people who are responsible for the deaths of millions of people. Look at Adolf Hitler and the rise of the Nazi Party in NSDAP. Heinrich Himmler, basically Hitler's direction, organized and made sure that the Holocaust was carried through. The Nuremberg laws, Kristallnacht. So you can look at Vladimir I. Lenin, Leon Trotsky, look at Joseph Stalin, his 5-year plans. Creation of the Axis Pact in 1936, the Tripartite Pact in 1937. The Anschluss, German annexation of Austria in 1938, the Munich Pact. Look at the eruption of World War II, the Blitzkrieg, Battle of Dunkirk. The rise of Winston Churchill and the Battle of Britain. Questions on that? So I ask the philosophical question here, what is evil? Is it simply the absence of good, or that a particular action has to be taken? It's a thought question. Perception, some say. Now, and of course, some people say that the good guys be evil, evil could be good, but there are certain things you do that are unquestionably horrible, beyond imagination. Hitler sends little kids to the gas chambers to be murdered. It's an act of evil. When he strips people of everything they have, their clothing, the gold fillings in their teeth, their hair, that is an act of evil. Stalin let millions of people starve to death and executed millions of others just because the idea that they might pose a threat to evil. That's evil. We're unquestioned acts of. Of course, the question always arises, where do such men come from? Where do such monsters arise out of the human condition? Like say, what twists a man's soul to turn him into that, make him think that's okay. Experimenting on live human beings is perfectly acceptable. Cutting out people's major organs, see how long they live afterwards, that's perfectly acceptable. Hitler did it in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Hitler did?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Have an answer.
Why do they choose so much?
They really aren't sure. All sorts of theories about it. Interesting thing is, actually some suggestions that he may have had some Jewish ancestry himself. I don't know, anti-Semitism was running at a fever pitch in Austria and Germany in those days, early 20th century. But why it was, we really don't know. Why Hitler more than anybody else, as much as so many other people, we don't know. Some suggestions that his mother, basically the only person in his life was ever decent to him, well, in her latter years, she developed breast cancer and died, and belief was Hitler was angry because the doctors were Jewish, but there was nothing they could do for her back in those days.
He felt like they
Killed his mother. Suggestion of it. But there was one cousin who kept, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, saying, you know those stories about the family having Jewish blood? Said, you don't pay me off, I'll go tell reporters they're true. Saying he, of course, he was paid off, and of course the cousin quickly left the country. There's this popular picture going through European and American newspapers in the late 1930s, a picture of a Jewish cemetery in Romania. Names one of the headstones was Adolf Hitler. Foreshadowing? That no one really knows. It's get to a level of that type of moral depravity and insanity. It's just an excuse.
So he was German.
Hitler was a German. May have had some Jewish ancestry in him, but of course, how many white people with some African American ancestry members of the Ku Klux Klan today? Hate is something that does not have any logic behind it. People use whatever excuse they can to justify it.
It's not adherent to power.
Hitler said that feeling that the blonde-haired, blue-eyed German was the perfect example of the pristine, perfect human being. But of course, what was Hitler? Look at the picture here on page 828. Dark hair, dark eyes.
That's real name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they got the funny mustache. 828. Yeah, that actually was a very common style for mustaches in the 1920s and 1930s. After 1945, you don't see it anymore.
Charlie Chaplin.
He did, because that's a very popular style.
Charlie Chaplin, yeah.
But after the 1940s, he doesn't have to anymore.
Skadoosh.
So he died there one day. You were not German, you were not healthy and whole, you just served the meal.
Pretty much. Like say, if you're not quite German, depends on who you are, they might let you live as a slave laborer, but basically anybody who was handicapped, blind, anybody who opposed him, killed. So basically, you and me will be his first targets. And my grandfather almost got killed in World War II fighting the Germans. He was in the artillery in France, late 1944. Got caught in a gunfight, and he's, according to the story, they had to get away, and he was got on top of a jeep while they were driving away. He's firing a machine gun at him, and he got shot on the way out. Most of the next year in the hospital, barely survived. That's my grandfather.
That was good.
My other grandfather was too young to die anymore.
Well, how old was your grandfather?
Grandpa Jack was, he was born in 1960. That's it. He was in his late 20s. He's considered to be the old man of the group. And funny story, his given name was Orvis. Orvis Imboden Bridges. Imboden's an old family name. Like I said, he went to work in the oil fields at Oklahoma years ago, and foreman comes up the first day, asks him, "What's your name?" Orvis. Comes up to him on the second day. "What's your name?" Orvis. Foreman comes up to him the third day. "What's your name?" Jack. And the name stuck ever since. So being a smart aleck runs in the family. My grandmother, her birthday was June 6th, so her 17th birthday was D-Day. But let's look at Adolf. Unemployed, bitter veteran, born in Austria. Had a friend of mine from Germany once said, actually he grew up in the years after World War II, said that the 1950s, 1960s, that German history stopped in 1932. They just wouldn't teach that for a while, but got to the point they had to. Once said, Austria's greatest foreign policy accomplishment was convincing the world that Hitler was German and Beethoven was Austrian. Hitler was born in Austria. His father was a civil servant, like a maniac himself. beat the children routinely. In fact, there was a story that one day Hitler's father beat him so badly he ended up in a coma. Fortunately, he woke up. But he became this big believer in the fate of Germany and German domination of the world. So when World War I started, he went to Germany and joined the German army. So he fancied himself an artist. Tried to enter the great art school in Vienna, but they wouldn't let him in, so he just wasn't good enough. Basically, he couldn't draw Tippy the Turtle. He went on his nightmarish career. But for a couple of years, he got a job as a house painter, even selling landscapes to tourists coming through Vienna. But one of the biggest problems was he couldn't draw people. And I say you can't. Now, being able to draw, that takes a lot of practice, a lot of skill. But if you're an artist at that level and you can't draw people, the problem with psychologically is because Hitler, he so discounted people emotionally and mentally that he just couldn't pay attention to their features. But Hitler, you say, fought World War I, but after the war he was dismissed from the army. Couldn't find work afterward. Like I say, twisted, angry, bitter. And then he joined this organization called the German Workers' Party. Basically, it's a far right-wing group of blue-collar workers. Basically, a group of people felt like they got in the shaft and they're blaming everybody in the world for their problems. Well, Hitler assumed control of this party by 1928 and rechristened it the German National Socialist Workers' Party. Yeah, Nazi. Like say in German, that's Deutsches Nationalsozialistische Arbeiterparty, NSDAP. Don't have to worry about that. It's National Socialist. That's where you get NS from the first two initials of the German abbreviation. That's where you get Nazi from. Of course, the swastika is a symbol of their party. See, up to that point, the swastika was considered to be a symbol of good luck. It's an example of how different symbols sometimes taken and perverted for different ends. Actually, you'll actually go downtown here and actually see these little swastikas in some of the doorways, some of the shops here. It's not because they're Nazi sympathizers, because it's a symbol of good luck. But after World War II, it was different.
Yeah, my sister did a study abroad in India, and they worked with the swastikas all over the place over there because it's what they call a symbol of auspiciousness or blessing.
Yeah.
Not just luck, it's auspicious, blessing. And so it's all over the temples over there, it's on the houses, over the doorways. It's a blessing symbol. But, there you go.
Yeah, so different things mean different things in different cultures. They change because what Hitler did in Europe, the West sees the swastika as a symbol of Nazi evil.
Right. When I moved here a few years back, we voted at the courthouse in the room where you go to vote now. You go through this little breezeway or whatever, going back out into the area. It's carpeted now, but underneath it was tile that had those swastika tile.
Yeah, it's built in the 1920s.
When I walked through there, I said, hold on, am I missing something? So I took pictures of it, and I asked the time, am I interpreting this wrong? And also there's another spot, their sidewalk, it's the same, it's right there on Main, what is it, it's the vacuum cleaner place. His outside tiles on the outside have the same symbols in them.
Actually, Mr. and Mrs. Career are about as far from Nazi as you can
No, I know they're
exactly.
but I know their tile is outside, that's from when they moved here. And I think he said it used to be a sign or something on the side that had onion heads or something on the side. or something years ago. And I was like, okay. But now in the courthouse, it's carpeted over. So I don't know if someone has said something about it or mentioned it, but
Because it wasn't built, so it's just
Right.
and it's something different.
right.
A single strange fact, before World War II, there were seven listings in the New York City Yellow Pages for people named Hitler. After World War II, 0. All those names got
That's
changed.
like this, but,
Was that very common?
It wasn't too common, but it was common enough here. People find it in New York every so often. Because of World War II, though, everyone's changing the name. In World War I, you had a lot of Americans, German Americans changing their names to sound less German in the United States. Celebrated World War II. But don't let the name socialist here throw you off. It is a far right-wing organization. They are as much against socialists and communists as you can possibly be. It's just simply a brand name.
right.
For example, country swearing in the word republic. People's Democratic Republic of Korea. It's Communist North Korea. Like I say, nothing democratic or Republican about it. It's just a brand name. Same thing as here. Socialism popular in the 1920s, so they just threw that in to try to attract people to it. Well, Hitler worked to develop a mass political movement. Except the Nazi Party developed its own paramilitary branch. Basically, they had their own army, propaganda machine, newspapers, and so forth. 1923, there were 55,000 members of the Nazi Party across Germany, including 15,000 in the paramilitary organization called the Stormtroopers. That's where we get the name for Star Wars.
Yeah.
But they were notoriously anti-Semitic. Actually, just kind of against everything, blaming everybody but for Germany's problems, but themselves. Actually, they between up there against homosexuals, and some of the early leaders of the Nazi Party were actually homosexual. Yeah, of the Nazi Party. A couple of them were.
A couple of them, but they were.
A couple of leaders were. Actually, I don't know one way or another, but here's the thing about Hitler was he never really had a lot of close relationships because basically his obsession was the cause. He dated one cousin for a couple of years, and she ended up committing suicide. Right there. He had this one long-term relationship with Eva Braun in the 1940s, but he only married her when they're in the bunker in his last days of World War II, and on their wedding night they killed themselves. Yeah, the corpses were burned. Yeah. Yeah. So, you ever think your man's not being romantic? Remember, it could always be worse. Remember this movie years ago? The line that kept repeating was, even Hitler had a girlfriend.
I thought he was a pessimist. I don't know why.
I said things he twisted around, but Hitler killed himself.
Oh my God.
1923, it was called the Beer Hall Putsch. Hitler decides he's going to take his paramilitary forces and he's going to overthrow the state government in Munich. It's called the Beer Hall Putsch because basically these guys are just known for sitting around the bars, drinking beer all day, arguing about politics. So they start up, but The attempt is quickly crushed. Several of his men are killed. Hitler is sent to prison on charges of treason. Now, it's while he was in prison, he wrote his autobiography, Mein Kampf. German means
I'm sorry, what did you say they tried to overthrow? Or
the state government unit, basically trying to use Munich as a springboard to take over the entire government by force. So he's arrested after that, writes his autobiography called My Struggle, which became required reading for all Germans when he took power.
Well, they had to read his book.
Yeah. In fact, they even gave it out to American POWs during the war, so they wouldn't read it, but nevertheless. So when they first started Amazon, the company a few years ago, the founder of the company, he was basically there having patent books too in that first big Christmas rush order, said he was unnerved by how many copies of Mein Kampf they were sending out. And basically, this is Hitler's story. Is they're talking about how he came to power, how everybody was always horrible to him. You hear the world's smallest violin playing, and his plans for world domination. Saying, among other things, Germany's big problem in World War I was fighting a two-front war, fighting Russia and France at the same time. So if he took power, his keys to world domination, he's not going to make that mistake. Eventually, he's going to take over the entire world.
And he'd always thought that he never, like, his plans always have been and always were world domination.
Pretty much. Yeah. Like I say, when Hitler also said here in Mein Kampf that the two biggest enemies to Germany were Russia and the United States. I believe they both fall. One, Russia, because of its economic system, communist. They couldn't organize very well against his fascist system. And second, the United States, because we were, in his words, a mongrel race. So Americans were a mix of everything. Yeah. So I guess who ends up defeating Hitler? Russia and the United States. But he had this bizarre fascination with racial purity, racial ideas. Very bizarre people floating very strange ideas that had no basis in reality, but Hitler is following along with his ideas about how the Germans are the peak example of human perfection. That everyone had to be blonde hair and blue eyes. In fact, when he came to power, he encouraged German women to have as many kids as possible, because these were the kids that were going to take over the world one day.
So if you weren't Jew, but you also weren't Nazi, you still had reason to be afraid for your life.
Oh, absolutely. Like I say, a lot of these people who spoke out against Hitler just disappeared or ended up in concentration camps.
Wasn't that a part of like that thing? Nuremberg, law, something.
Exactly, Nuremberg.
About the citizenship that you when you put these like work camps and someone actually disappeared.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Can you still get, not like I don't want to read it, but I'm just curious, can you still get Mein Kampf?
It's a public domain. You can get it. It's public domain. You can get it.
Yeah, he can get it. Actually, I probably order a copy to the library. It's basically just a tale.
It's not like we said, hey, let's burn it.
No, it's basically looking at the man's descendant insanity.
That's what I'm wondering. Is it more of a self-promotion from his end, or is it more of a inside look at his, like, kind of like a way of
It basically was kind of his own self-promotion. So they really built a personality cult around him. Like I say, you could look at it from a psychological point of view, basically saying, yes, this pretty guy's really going off the rails here.
but it's not his own psychoanalysis of himself.
Now, it's not an analysis of himself.
Have you read?
Actually, I've read excerpts here and there. I'd say if you really want to read something on the psychology, the OSS report from World War II, like 1942, the American Intelligence Report, basically got a group of psychologists to psychoanalyze Hitler. He was writing speeches, talking to people who knew him. Like I said, that report's available online. Just look for Hitler Psychological Study, or Hitler OSS report. And these psychologists said, what's going to happen to Hitler in the end? Said, Hitler predicted he would kill himself. Said he's not going to run. He's not going to try to escape. He said no one's going to try to overthrow him because he's got too many people too close to him, true believers around him. Said he will kill himself. And 3 years before he did, they predicted it.
I know you don't know why he killed himself. I mean, like, when he's still in power?
He is still in power, but basically his power is limited to that underground bunker. And so in the last days, he's giving orders to units that didn't even exist anymore. Mm-hmm. He kept muttering to himself about how he'd been betrayed, the people of Germany didn't deserve him. And he believed that he was going to be taken by the Russians, put on public display, publicly beaten and humiliated, like Mussolini was when he was assassinated. Actually, he didn't want that to happen, so he decided he's just going to kill himself.
He went underground.
Yeah, basically because the Russians, the Americans are bombing the city day and night. By the time the Russians in there with their heavy artillery, they're pounding buildings to rubble.
Trying to find him.
Trying to find him.
So we also, that a lot of Germans were already dead at this point because of Hitler. Did the most of them escape, or were we counting?
During World War II?
Yeah, like
in 1945. Oh, there are millions of Germans already dead.
Right, so I'm saying, but like, we're bombing the cities day in, day out. Are we killing a lot of Germans, or are we?
We are killing a lot of Germans.
Innocent.
Just about.
Yeah. Basically, you got to understand about war is it's not clean.
Right.
Innocent people will die. Right. They didn't have precision bombing back then. Like I said, today you can have somebody flying a jet over in Mississippi or Alabama fire a missile through this window right here.
Right.
Precision bombing World War II meant you're getting it within a quarter mile of your target.
That's very true. Missiles are accurate.
Like saying Hitler would put civilians close to military targets just for propaganda purposes. Look at all these people the Allies killed.
Pretty much. He wanted to be the one to kill himself. He didn't want anybody else.
Pretty much.
Get it for gratification.
Oh, he was. And he was. They put him. He was on dope, on all sorts of things. Doctors had him just. They could see him in the last days of the war. He's shaking all the time. He's falling apart physically. In fact, a lot of the German army put a lot of their troops on meth, keeping going fighting longer and harder.
So they had a bunch of crack eaters fighting.
Pretty much. Like saying the meth going around Arkansas and all the rural areas today, based on the Nazi recipe. Nazi meth.
Did he have any keys?
There were stories for years. Nothing's ever been proven.
He died not regretting anything, right?
Pretty much. Actually, he's a nutcase. We spent a whole semester on World War II. But Hitler kept on talking about Mein Kampf, the idea of Lebensraum. Kaiser talked about Germany's place in the sun, Lebensraum, basically living space. They talked about essentially moving everybody out of Eastern Europe and Western Russia and replacing them with Germans. In his vision, Moscow would be destroyed, just turned into a big giant lake. Like I said, America would be taken over also. In fact, there were plans for the Nazi invasion of the United States. In fact, they found after World War II in the German military archives plans for these transatlantic bombers called the America bombers. So they're planning on it. They're actually training troops for occupying certain areas of the United States. Also, for the time being, the Nazi Party is crushed, but when he gets out of jail, he reorganizes the Nazis on a regional basis, expanding throughout Germany by 1929. 1925, they're down to 27,000. 1929, up to 178,000. Again, most under 30. Again, most had been veterans. It's not to say all veterans are automatically going to be fascists. Just these particular fascists just happen to be veterans. Let's get you a handout here. The growth of the German Nazis in the Reichstag, German Parliament. So the column at the bottom is starting from far right, going down to far left.
Like it was typed on the old typewriter.
Actually, I got one of these from my old graduate professor. He did a whole bunch of studies on Hitler and World War II. And his name was Wolf Lowry. Great scholar, wonderful man. So as you can see here, 1928, Nazis had 12 members of the Reichstag. By far a minority party. The leading party was actually the Social Democrats. But the president at the time, Paul von Hindenburg, hated the Social Democrats and would not make them a Social Democrat leader of the Reichstag. Hitler actually ran for president against Hindenburg in the mid-1920s. What's that? He did. He actually thought he could win. Hindenburg was a World War I general, great war hero, won very easily against Hitler.
So why was he so popular, like taking over when he took over?
See, he moved very slowly and very subtly.
Being the president.
Except Hitler thought he could be president, but instead Hindenburg becomes president.
Oh, at the time.
Yeah. Hindenburg was president.
Okay.
And so this is what's going to happen. Hindenburg actually hated Hitler. I was called him the little corporal. Hated him. But here's the problem. Great Depression, 40% unemployment. People are desperate. People looking for some kind of solution, any kind of solution. German politics being pulled apart by that proportional representation. Nobody has to work together. They're too busy trying to knock each other down in order to they're trying to do something for the country. So by 1930, the Nazis ended up winning a ton of seats in the Reichstag, mostly expense of the other right-wing parties, but basically giving everybody someone to blame for Germany's problems. Now for the lower classes, he said the problem was the international financiers were crushing Germany. Basically, Jewish bankers. Basically, giving them someone to hate. And basically, giving somebody someone to look down on, that is, people all over the world do that. Not careers. Middle class, he said, he appealed to their fears of communism. They said, I'll keep the communists from taking over. I'll keep the communists from coming in and seizing your homes and your businesses and your bank accounts. The upper class is telling them he'll end all these labor strikes and all this crime wave across Germany because German society is disintegrated at this point. Unemployment spiral. Unemployment's out of control. Inflation's out of control again. Crime is on an increase. Like I said, unions are striking every day. He told evangelical Christians in Germany, said, yeah, I'll protect you from having the communists take over the churches. Because what happened at Stalin took over Russia was basically destroyed all the churches. So here's what's happening. By 1932, first election that year, the Nazis have 800,000 members, and the Nazis become the largest party in the Reichstag. But Hindenburg He doesn't trust Hitler. He hates his guts. But he doesn't like the Social Democrats either. So he's already ruled out the two largest parties in Germany of who's going to be chancellor. They can't find a coalition to govern Germany. You understand, there were a lot of people who liked what Hitler's had to say. Like I said, people talk about his mesmerizing speaking style, but only to those to whom Hitler was saying what they wanted to hear. If they liked what he had to say, they liked his speaking style. But there are a lot of people who hated Hitler. A lot of people fighting against him. There was a chancellor of West Germany in the 1970s talked about when he was a kid. In the 1930s, he and his friends from the Social Democratic youth groups would be picking fights with the Hitler Youth all the time. And of course, a lot of people thought Hitler was just a buffoon. He's an idiot. Look at the guy standing there in those funny uniforms, that goofy mustache, that weird speaking style. So people make fun of him a lot.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
But it was like just enough of them to basically rule.
Yeah. Basically, he was largely just Hitler was just largely ridiculed. A lot of people didn't take it seriously. Well, so they try a second election in 1932. Nazis lose 34 seats in the Reichstag. It's a major party to gain seats, the Communists. But at this point, Hindenburg's thinking that he cannot govern Germany, may just simply dismiss the Reichstag and rule by decree. So that's where this man comes in, Franz von Papen, the vice chancellor. He's head of the Center Party. It's a Roman Catholic party, centrists. And they're trying to figure out who's going to be chancellor, but Hindenburg decided he's just made us dismiss the whole thing and rule by decree, which would happen in a lot of other countries by this point. Von Papen says, look, we got one option to elect here, Hitler. Like I say, he just lost the election in the second round of election in 1932. Hitler thought his career was over. Von Papen says to Hindenburg, make Hitler chancellor. Like I said, between the two of us, we can control him. We can reel him in, get him to quit making those dumb speeches, wearing those idiotic uniforms, make him into a half-respectable politician. We can control him. So January 1933, Hindenburg names Hitler chancellor. But the underlying story here was Hitler was given power. He was not elected. He was not the choice of the people. He's just a desperate, he's just the Hail Mary pass, so to speak. Well, blasphemy to say that even. But basically, Hindenburg and von Papen trying to find a way out. Von Papen's a very cynical, bitter European politician. Thinks he can control Hitler. But he can't. What happened was, once Hitler becomes chancellor, head of the Reichstag, quickly forms a ruling coalition between him and the German National People's Party, the DNVP. And von Papen and Hindenburg run into a few problems, because among other things, previous chancellors have been given powers to ban more violent political groups, because violence and crime is such a problem in Germany that the Reichstag started whittling back certain political freedoms. They say the entire groups, political parties may be banned. Well, to make matters worse, February 1933, the next month, the Reichstag burns down. Turns out Hitler had his own people do it. The Reichstag, the German Parliament building. And Hitler blamed the communists for it and sought broader emergency powers. basically creating a crisis and trying to give himself more powers to take care of it. But so he's banning some of the more violent political groups and those not violent political groups. The opposition's so divided that they really don't mind seeing some of their opponents being knocked down. Now he's basically assumed emergency powers. So you have a piece of legislation called the Enabling Act, passed by the Reichstag. This act, it allows the government to dispense with the constitutional government for 4 years. Basically, Hitler can rule by decree for the next 4 years. So in that moment, the Weimar Republic is dead. Hitler was ruling by decree. Held in check only by Hindenburg. The problem was Hindenburg's old, sick, dying. Doesn't have the will to keep fighting Hitler all the time. Doesn't have the power to even dismiss him as chancellor now.
What exactly is it?
It's a version of a prime minister. Basically, he's head of making up all the legislation, but basically Hindenburg went up the veto over to appoint the prime minister as chancellor. You see, the Nazis, they moved with a lot of subtlety. Hitler didn't win an election, basically, but he was in a close enough position of power, he could seize it when the moment came. So in 1934, Hindenburg dies, and Hitler assumes the office of both Chancellor and President. Himself a new title, Führer. German roughly means leader. Basically, in 1934, he has absolute unquestioned power in Germany. No one can stop him now.
That's F-U-H.
Yeah, F-U-H-R-E-R. With the umlaut over it. So once Führer, he purged the civil service of the Jews. Basically, anyone who is Jewish was fired from the government. Concentration camps where his political opponents opened. Basically, at this point, they're basically just slave labor prison camps for the undesirables at this point. Like I said, the Holocaust doesn't start overnight. Moving a lot of subtlety here. Hitler assumed emergency powers. He now has control over the media, control over the police, control of the army, and plus he has his own personal army. The stormtroopers, the brown shirts, and the light brown uniforms.
Like that movie, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it's a very sad movie.
Yeah.
But Hitler came to power. A lot of people still didn't take him seriously. Thought, oh, you know, some of these SS guys even have Jewish girlfriends. They can't possibly mean what they're saying. They say it's not possible to go that far. Watch his rise to power. He meant every word of it. So when people run for office, they generally tell you what they want to do. So they're not exaggerating.
You started. Stirred up.
So Hitler began developing what he called the Aryan state. Strict marriage laws, basically trying to control who was marrying who's having all the kids. Basically, pure-blooded Germans could not marry Jews. Shouldn't have created some problems. There are a lot of Germans who were married to Jews.
So what if they were already?
They're allowed to stay married, but there actually was an incident during World War II where several of these Jewish husbands of these German women were ordered to the concentration camps. So these women just rose up the days of demonstrations in Berlin. That was the largest public show of defiance of Hitler during this entire period.
How would they know if Hitler wasn't pure German? I mean...
So no one's going to question that. Plus, he's sealed all the records. He's paid people off.
Okay.
There are several other leaders of the early days of the Nazi Party he had killed. So if anybody might possibly question him, might know him from the old days, I'd have some kind of dirt on him.
Like the
Gone.
cousin.
Yeah, the cousin. Well, he got out of Germany. Albert Einstein, who was living in Germany at the time, the day Hitler became chancellor, he left Germany and never came back. Went to the United States. See, that's why a man was a genius. His score was. Well, Hitler decides to restart the economy by using public works and grants to firms to restart employment, basically paying these factories to reopen. He's trying to modernize German infrastructure, the modern highway system, the Autobahn. He even starts this one car company just to bring the car to the common people. Volkswagen.
Yeah.
The People's Wagon.
Yeah. That's no.
In fact, a lot of these German companies that selling products in the United States, they often used, some of them used Jewish slave labor during World War II, like BMW, some of the big chemical companies and so forth. The Japanese planes that bombed Pearl Harbor during World War II, the engines were made by Mitsubishi. So they can legitimately say some of the best engines Mitsubishi built on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean right now.
Explain to me then, how does this work with us buying from German products? We can trade with them. What is the issue with them with all of their past history, and compared to with Cuba or, for instance, or things of that nature? How does that work?
It's in the kind of Cold War politics. Soviets were threatening the U.S. and the West after World War II, so we said we'd better get Germany back on its feet again. Regardless of what these companies did, we'll punish the people who are actually responsible for it and get these companies started again, so Germany can be, West Germany can be an industrial power. Cuba was never an industrial power, of course. It's like a Las Vegas on an island. But when the communists came to power, decided we had to make a show to the Soviets that we're not going to tolerate this, so we just shut Cuba down. Basically, so we wouldn't be doing business with the communists. We basically saw them as the next big threat after the Nazis were defeated in World War II. So that's where we are. So even Mitsubishi, some of those companies, and the feeling was we prosecuted people who headed these companies who committed these acts, but so we're willing to spare the individual Germans, the individual Japanese who were just working for these companies. Basically, we needed to have these countries strong and willing to help us face the Soviets.
See how fast Japan rebuilt itself.
Yeah, very rapidly after World War II. In fact, during World War II, there was a lot of open talk in the United States of just sterilizing all the Japanese. Basically making sure there would be no more Japanese that were born again, but that plan could be scrapped, especially in light of the Holocaust. We just couldn't be like them, the Germans. But anyway, people are going to work in Germany, and rearmament is also the key. Basically, they're going to start building weapons and rebuilding their military. So by 1934, unemployment in Germany was at 2.6 million. By 1937, it's down to just 500,000. Declines dramatically. And you got this guy, Heinrich Himmler, Hitler's right-hand man. He was in charge of the secret police, the SS, and he believed in maintaining control through what he called terror and ideology. Terrifying the people with their ideology, constant propaganda, reinforcing Nazi ideals, dehumanizing Jews and others they consider to be undesirable. It's trying to further the Aryan system. And when it finally starts, Himmler is going to be the one in charge of the concentration camps and the death camps. He's the one deciding how these are built, where, and how people are going to be slaughtered.
Wow.
He's the one in charge of it.
So it just wasn't Hitler's idea to build a concentration camp and...
Actually, Hitler had the idea to basically let's kill all the Jews, but Himmler and his aides decided just how exactly it's going to be done.
Okay.
You can give that idea.
Death camps. concentration camps at the hard labor camps, death camps, basically just sent just to be slaughtered.
Like busting through concrete.
Yeah, working at the factories and whatever else. That's it. The Wannsee Conference in 1941, where they came up with what they called the final solution. It's not all of a sudden they decided, oh, we're going to kill all the. All of a sudden, at that point, they decided they're going to commit mass genocide. They decided how they were going to do it. This plan many years in the making. Finally, the point they're going to make it happen. The Hitler Youth were a group of young being indoctrinated to basically worship Hitler. In fact, German children, the Hitler Youth, basically pray to Hitler. Hitler's promised to rescue the church from the communists. They created the National Reich Church. He took over all the churches and made them all follow give certain sermons that were favorable to the government and the Nazi Party. Basically, Hitler took over all the churches. All possibilities of opposing Hitler were cut off one after another. All parties but the Nazis were banned. They can't defeat him in an election. Hitler has control of the police, the media. Labor unions are all banned, so you can't get the workers together to basically prevent the government from carrying out its instructions. And suppose armed rebellion. Well, Hitler's encouraging everybody to spy on each other.
Okay.
So how are you going to do that? How are you going to organize an armed rebellion when everybody's spying on you? The secret police are infiltrating everywhere. Of course, the question some people raise is, why didn't the Jews fight back? Well, consider these numbers. 1939, approximate Jewish population of Germany is about 210,000. Total population of Germany is 70 million. That 210,000 includes old men and women, children. They're scattered across Germany and divided out what to do. A lot of Jews are saying, we've been through worse. We've been through guys like Hitler before. We'll survive this time. A lot of them trying to make plans to leave. But how is a loosely organized armed group of just a few tens of thousands going to match Hitler's private army, the regular army, and the police?
So there wasn't like a mass uprising, there wasn't like 10 million people out of the 70 million saying, this is wrong, we should do this, they were all just scared of him or intimidated or something like that.
They pretty much were intimidated. They pretty much blocked at every turn. They said the Jews couldn't do anything to defend themselves. There were people saying, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this, but where are they going to say it? Newspapers, they're not going to put a letter to the editor about that. If somebody says it too loudly, one of the neighbors will rat them out, and they'll go to the concentration camps. There are a lot of political leaders in Germany, some of these outlawed political parties. They I knock on the door one morning, there's the SS. Congratulations, you're going to concentration camp. Von Papen, placed under house arrest for the remainder of the war. They were severely limited in what they could do. Militants were very closely monitored. All their possessions basically being stripped from them at the time, so every day passed got harder and harder to leave. And some were saying, why should I leave? This is my home. They say women were prized as mothers, rewarded for having many children. And since women basically are supposed to give birth to the next generation of Nazis, like I say, they were kicked out of industry and heavy labor jobs, kicked away from fired from university professor positions, out of law and medicine, so they could basically stay home and be barefoot pregnant. You have the Nuremberg Laws in 1935. This law is Jews restricted their citizenship, forbidden to marriage Jews and Germans. 1938, you have Kristallnacht. November 9th, 10th of 1938, Hitler unleashes a Nazi riot. Basically, they go all over the country, looting and burning Jewish homes and businesses. That's 7,000 Jewish businesses destroyed, about 100 people killed. At the end of it, 30,000 Jews are rounded up and sent to concentration camps. Kristallnacht called the night of broken glass, where all the glass is shattered everywhere. And afterwards, all Jews are banned from public buildings and prohibited from being employed in a retail store or owning a retail store. Okay, and that's just what's happening in Germany. Okay, we'll talk about the Soviets beginning World War II next time.
Is this the beginning of chapter 27?
Yes.
This is chapter.